My name is Riley Dawson, and I am 27 years old. If you looked at me from the outside, you'd probably see a woman who has her life together, steady hands, sharp eyes, shoulders squared from years of training and discipline. People often tell me I walk like I own the ground beneath my boots. But behind that stride, behind the uniform I once wore with pride, is a scar that isn't visible on my skin. It's the scar of being told by my own father that I wasn't his daughter. I grew up in Springfield, Illinois, a modest town where everybody knew your name and your family's reputation was your inheritance. My father, Charles Dawson, was one of the town's most respected men. He ran Dawson Industries, a construction and logistics company that employed half the county. When Charles Dawson spoke, people listened. When he walked into church on Sunday, people shook his hand like he was the governor. But at home, behind those brick walls and perfectly trimmed hedges, he was a man who demanded perfection and obedience. My mother, Caroline, was the soft in our hard-edged household. She had gentle eyes and a voice that made you forget whatever storm was raging outside or inside. But she died when I was only 12. Cancer. Quick, brutal, and unfair. After that, my father remarried within a year to Vivian, a woman who made it clear from day one that she wanted nothing to do with me. She had a son, Ethan, who was a year older than me. Spoiled, smug, and entitled, he was the golden boy in my father's eyes. So while Ethan got praise for every little achievement, I had to fight just to be noticed. And more often than not, my efforts weren't enough. By the time I was in high school, I knew I wanted a different path. I wasn't interested in Dawson Industries, in corporate dinners, or in pretending I cared about quarterly profits. I wanted something bigger, something with meaning. So at 17, I made up my mind I was going to enlist in the military. When I first mentioned it to my father, I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd be proud. Maybe he'd see the courage in his only daughter, the willingness to serve something greater than myself. I thought he'd finally look at me the way he looked at Ethan. Instead, his face hardened like stone. "You will not disgrace this family by playing soldier," he said, his voice cutting through me like barbed wire. "Your place is here. You'll get your degree in business, you'll join the company, and you'll learn to behave like a Dawson." But I wasn't going to bend. For the first time in my life, I stood firm. "No, Dad," I said. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. "This is my life. My decision. I'm enlisting." The silence that followed was suffocating. Vivian smirked in the corner, as though she'd been waiting for this crack to widen into a canyon. Ethan leaned back in his chair, smug satisfaction written all over his face. And then my father delivered the words that would haunt me for years. "You're not my daughter." I blinked, thinking I misheard. "What did you say?" "You heard me," he said coldly. "Your mother, she wasn't faithful. You don't have my blood in your veins. I knew it all along. And now you've proven it. No child of mine would throw away her future for a uniform." I felt the ground shift beneath me. My ears rang. My chest tightened like someone had pressed a boot against it. My father, my rock, my authority, the man I had spent my life trying to please, had just erased me with a sentence. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand proof. I wanted to cling to the memory of my mother and say, she would never. But the words lodged in my throat, drowned by the humiliation of his rejection. Vivian's eyes sparkled with triumph. Ethan laughed under his breath. And I grabbed my jacket, walked out of that house, and swore I would never beg for their acceptance again. But the thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just sit in your past. It clings to you. It whispers in the quiet moments. It shows up in the mirror when you're brushing your teeth, reminding you that you weren't enough, that you were disposable, that you were unloved. When I boarded that bus to basic training, I carried my duffel bag on my shoulder and the weight of my father's words in my chest. I told myself I'd build a new identity, one forged in sweat, discipline, and honor. If he didn't see me as his daughter, then fine. I'd make a name for myself that needed no one's approval. And yet, even as I pushed through grueling drills, sleepless nights, and battlefields far from home, the echo of that rejection never left me. There's a particular kind of loneliness in serving your country while knowing your own family wouldn't care if you came back in a flag-draped coffin. I wrote letters, though. At first, I believed maybe my father would soften. Maybe the distance and the danger would remind him that blood or no blood, I was still his child. I wrote about the sandstorms, about the camaraderie, about the moments that made me proud and the moments that made me afraid. But weeks turned into months, and no reply ever came. The only letters I got were from Vivian, short, sharp notes telling me not to bother, that my father had moved on, that I should stop pretending I belonged. It wasn't until much later that I learned she had hidden my letters, never letting my father read a single one. But that's a story for another chapter. For now, all you need to know is that my name is Riley Dawson. I am 27 years old. And the day my father told me I wasn't his daughter was the day I stopped being a child and started being a soldier. I didn't know then that one day, his words would be turned on their head. That one day, a lawyer would read his will, and the truth, his truth, would break the chains he tried to put on me. But until that moment came, I carried the betrayal like a shadow. And when you carry a shadow long enough, it shapes you into someone who knows how to fight. And fight I did. If this story so far resonates with you, or you're curious to see what happens next, make sure to like this video, subscribe, hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next chapter, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. When I first stepped off the bus at basic training, the smell of dust and sweat hit me like a wall. Rows of recruits stood at attention, eyes wide with fear, uniforms stiff and new. The drill sergeant barked orders, so sharp they cut through the morning air like bullets. I remember straightening my back, trying not to show that I was shaking inside. I had told myself I was ready for this, that I had already survived worse, the rejection of my own father. But in truth, I was terrified. Still, fear has a strange way of sharpening you. While others broke down under the pressure, I dug my heels in deeper. Every push-up, every mile run, every sleepless night became a battle I refused to lose. Because in the back of my mind, there was always that voice. You're not his daughter. You don't belong. And I was determined to prove, to him, to myself, to anyone watching, that I did belong, if not in his world, then in my own. The first weeks blurred together, days stitched with sweat and pain. But when the barracks lights went out, and I was alone with my thoughts, I always reached for a pen. I wrote letters, long, messy, honest letters, to my father. I told him about the ache in my muscles, about the pride I felt when I finally nailed a drill, about the way I missed Mom's voice more than ever. I wrote about the way the stars looked when you lay on the ground after lights out, staring at the endless sky and realizing how small you were. At first, writing felt like hope. I sealed each envelope carefully, pressing the paper like it might carry the weight of my longing. Every time I dropped one into the outgoing mail, I imagined him reading it, imagined his face softening, imagined him realizing I was still his daughter, no matter what cruel words he'd thrown at me. But weeks went by, then months, and nothing came back. The first time mail call passed without my name, I brushed it off. Maybe he was busy. The second time, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. By the third, I knew he wasn't writing back. Still, I couldn't stop myself from writing. Each letter became a plea, though I never admitted it out loud. I told myself it was about sharing my journey, but the truth was uglier. I was begging to be seen, begging to be acknowledged. And then, finally, one envelope did come. But it wasn't from my father. It was from Vivian. I remember tearing it open so fast, I almost ripped the paper inside. My heart pounded with a flicker of hope. Maybe she was writing to tell me Dad had read my letters, that he was proud but too stubborn to say it himself. But her words were poison. Riley, stop embarrassing yourself. Your father has moved on. You've chosen your path, and it has nothing to do with this family. Don't write anymore. He doesn't want to hear from you. My hands trembled as I read it, the neat loops of her handwriting curling around each cruel word. I crumpled the letter into a ball and shoved it into my locker, but the damage was done. From then on, I told myself I didn't care. I trained harder, volunteered for extra drills, anything to drown out the silence that followed every letter I sent home. But late at night, when the barracks were quiet, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The idea that my father had read my words and chosen not to answer was unbearable. It wasn't until much later, years later, that I discovered the truth. That Vivian had hidden every letter I wrote, tucking them away where he'd never see them. That the silence I had blamed on him was her deliberate cruelty. But at that time, I didn't know. All I knew was the crushing weight of rejection. The loneliness of deployment is a special kind of ache. You're surrounded by people every day, but at night, when the dust settles and the adrenaline fades, you realize how far away from home you really are. Some of the others would get packages, cookies, photos, little reminders that they were loved. I'd watch their faces light up, hear them laugh as they shared stories from home, and I'd smile with them. But inside, I felt the hollow echo of absence. Still, the military gave me something my family never did: purpose. Out there, it didn't matter that I wasn't Charles Dawson's real daughter. It didn't matter that Vivian hated me or that Ethan sneered whenever my name came up. What mattered was that I could hold my own, that I could protect the person next to me, that I could stand tall in the face of things that would break lesser people. I carried that pride like armor. And yet, no matter how many medals I earned or missions I completed, there was always a shadow following me. Every time I caught myself thinking about home, that voice crept back in. You're not his daughter. You never were. The hardest day came during my second deployment. We had just returned from a particularly rough mission, dust in our throats, exhaustion in our bones. Mail had arrived while we were gone, and everyone crowded around as names were called out. One by one, envelopes were handed out, little pieces of home passed from hand to hand. But again, nothing for me. I tried to hide my disappointment, but one of the guys noticed. He nudged me and said, "Don't worry, Dawson. They probably just missed your name. Next time." I nodded and forced a smile. But inside, I knew better. There would never be a next time. That night, I sat on my bunk, staring at the empty space where a letter should have been. My chest ached with a grief I couldn't share with anyone. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand why I wasn't good enough. But all I did was pick up my pen and write another letter, one I knew would never get a reply. "Dear Dad," I began, though the word felt foreign now. "I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if you even care. But today was hard. Today I needed you, and you weren't there." By the time I finished, my tears had smudged the ink. I folded it carefully, slid it into an envelope, and dropped it into the outgoing pile. Not because I believed it would change anything, but because writing was the only way to keep myself from drowning. Looking back now, I see how those years shaped me. How the silence from home carved resilience into my bones. How every unanswered letter became a reminder that the only person I could truly rely on was myself. But at the time, it didn't feel like strength. It felt like abandonment. There was one night I'll never forget. We were out on the edge of a desert base, the stars so bright they looked like you could reach up and pluck them from the sky. I lay there, helmet off, sand sticking to my skin, and I whispered into the darkness, "Mom, if you can hear me, tell me I belong. Tell me I'm not nothing." The wind answered back, carrying dust across my face, but no voice came. And in that silence, I realized something I would carry for the rest of my life. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it isn't even the people who raised you. Sometimes family is the people who stand by you when the world falls apart. And my father? He wasn't family. He was just a man who shared my last name and broke my heart. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have imagined, was that one day the truth would come out. That buried in a lawyer's office was a will that would shatter the lies Vivian had spun and force my father's voice to speak again, even from the grave. But until that day came, all I had was the ache of unanswered letters, the weight of rejection, and the fire it lit in me to survive. Because if my father didn't want me, then damn it, I'd make sure the world did. When I came back home, the air smelled different. It wasn't the sharp sting of sandstorms or the metallic tang of gun oil I'd grown used to overseas. It was sweet, heavy with cut grass and summer rain. I thought maybe, just maybe, stepping off that bus in Springfield would feel like a homecoming. Like walking into a place where time had held its breath waiting for me. But the truth was, home had moved on without me. I stood there in my pressed uniform, duffel bag slung over my shoulder, watching families rush into each other's arms. Mothers sobbed into their sons' necks. Children clung to fathers who scooped them up with trembling hands. Couples kissed like they'd survived the end of the world. The air rang with laughter, relief, and the kind of love I'd carried like a phantom all these years. No one came for me. I waited at first. My eyes searched the crowd, scanning for the familiar height of my father, the sharp heels of Vivian's designer shoes, even the smirk of Ethan's face. But there was nothing. Just strangers and the realization that my family hadn't bothered to show. A few of my comrades noticed. "Hey, Dawson," one said softly. "You need a ride?" I forced a smile and shook my head.
Nah.
I'll figure it out. But inside, something cracked again. I had risked my life for years, carried their name with me into deserts and danger, and yet to them, I was still invisible. I walked the 3 blocks from the bus station to the Dawson estate, my boots echoing on the quiet pavement. The house loomed just as I remembered, brick walls, trimmed hedges, the perfect picture of respectability. But the lights blazing in the windows weren't for me. They were for the people inside, the family who had chosen to erase me. When I rang the bell, the door opened to Vivian. She looked me up and down like I was dirt tracked in from the street. "Well," she said coolly, crossing her arms. "Look who decided to show up." I straightened my shoulders, the metals on my chest catching the porch light. I just came back from serving my country. I thought maybe my father would want to see me. Her laugh was sharp, cold. "Your father doesn't need theatrics. He's busy. Unlike you, he has a real life." My jaw tightened. "Where is he?" She smirked. "Inside. But don't expect a welcome parade.
You made your choices, Riley.
Don't come back here expecting us to clap for you." And just like that, she shut the door in my face. For a moment I stood frozen, the weight of the duffel bag dragging on my shoulder, the sting of her words burning hotter than the desert sun ever had. I wanted to scream, to pound on the door, to force them to acknowledge me. But I didn't. I turned, walked back down those steps, and left that house behind. I rented a small apartment near downtown. The walls were thin, the pipes rattled when the water ran, and the heater clinked like it was about to give up the ghost. But it was mine. And after years of living under orders, it felt strange to have a place where no one could tell me I didn't belong. Still, loneliness followed me like a second shadow. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of traffic outside. I thought about the home I wasn't welcome in, the father who still refused to claim me, the brother who inherited the love I never got. It wasn't long before I ran into Ethan. It was at a local coffee shop of all places. He strolled in wearing an expensive suit, phone pressed to his ear, barking orders like he was the CEO of Wall Street. He spotted me as I was stirring sugar into my coffee, and his smirk widened like a knife wound. "Well, if it isn't our little soldier girl," he drawled, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Back to play civilian, huh?" I clenched my jaw.
Ethan.
He sat across from me without asking, his cologne choking the air between us. "You know, you've caused quite a stir in this town. People keep asking why my father's only daughter doesn't come around anymore. You know what we tell them." I didn't answer. He leaned in, eyes glittering with malice. "We tell them you wanted nothing to do with us. That you abandoned your family. Makes us look better. Makes you look disposable." I gripped my coffee cup, so hard I thought it might shatter. "You always were a liar. And you always were an outsider," he shot back, standing and brushing invisible dust from his jacket. "Enjoy your little apartment. Dad doesn't need you. Neither do I." With that, he walked out, leaving the scent of arrogance in his wake. I sat there for a long time, staring at the table, fury pulsing through my veins. But beneath the anger was something worse. Hurt. No matter how many walls I built around myself, their words still cut through. Still, I refused to break. I got a job at a local veterans office, helping others transition back into civilian life. I threw myself into the work, the hours long and the pay modest, but at least I was doing something that mattered. For the first time, I wasn't fighting for my father's approval. I was fighting for myself. Then came the call. I was sitting at my desk, paperwork scattered in front of me, when my phone buzzed. The caller ID read Dawson Estate. For a moment, my chest tightened. My thumb hovered over the decline button, but curiosity won. "Hello," I said cautiously. The voice on the other end was shaky. "A housekeeper, one I remembered from my childhood. Riley, it's about your father. He's very sick." I froze. "Sick? What do you mean?" "Hospitalized. It's bad. You should come." The line went dead before I could ask more. For a long moment I sat there, phone heavy in my hand, my heart racing. After everything he'd said, after all the years of silence, did I really owe him my presence now? But the truth was, he was still my father, whether he admitted it or not. And a part of me, stupid, stubborn, aching, still wanted to see him. When I arrived at the hospital, the sight of him nearly knocked the breath from my chest. He looked smaller somehow, sunken into the bed, tubes and monitors surrounding him like a web. His once commanding voice was reduced to a rasp, his eyes dull but still sharp enough to recognize me. "You," he whispered when he saw me. "It's me," I said softly, stepping closer. "Riley." His lips curled into something that might have been a sneer, or maybe it was just pain. "Why are you here?" The words hit like a slap, but I held my ground. "Because you're my father." His eyes narrowed, the same cold steel I remembered from childhood.
No.
"You're not. Don't pretend." My throat tightened. I wanted to tell him about the nights I had cried myself to sleep, about the letters he never saw, about the pride I had carried even when he denied me. But looking at him, fragile yet still cruel, I knew it wouldn't matter. He would never give me the recognition I craved. So I turned away, tears burning hot in my eyes, and left the room without another word. 2 weeks later, he was gone. The funeral was a spectacle, as I knew it would be. The church overflowed with mourners, businessmen, politicians, townsfolk who spoke of him like he was a saint. Vivian stood at the front in a tailored black dress, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, while Ethan shook hands and accepted condolences like he was already the heir apparent. I sat in the back, head bowed, listening to the eulogies that painted my father as a giant. No one mentioned the cruelty. No one mentioned the daughter he had disowned. When it was over, I slipped out before anyone noticed me. I didn't belong there. Not in their world. Not in their grief. I thought that would be the end of it. That my father's death was the final nail in the coffin of whatever bond we might have had. But then the lawyer called. "Miss Dawson," he said formally, "your presence is required at the reading of the will." I almost laughed.
Why?
He said I wasn't his daughter. "All the same," the lawyer replied, "he named you. You'll want to hear what he had to say." And just like that, the ground shifted beneath me again. Because if there's one thing I'd learned about my father, it was this. Even in death, he held power. And whatever was written in that will had the potential to break me or set me free. The call from the lawyer kept echoing in my head for days. I tried to push it aside, bury it under paperwork at the veterans office, distract myself with long runs and late nights. But no matter what I did, it kept creeping back. Your presence is required at the reading of the will. Required. Not optional. Not polite. Required. I didn't understand it. My father had spent years denying me, pushing me away, shredding whatever bond we had left. What could he possibly have to say in death that he never bothered to say in life? Part of me didn't want to go. Part of me wanted to let Vivian and Ethan have it all, choke on their inheritance, rot in their hollow mansion with their empty victories. But another part, the part that had sat awake night after night begging for answers, couldn't stay away. The day of the reading, I stood outside the law office for a long time, staring up at the polished brass letters on the door, Whitman and Reeves, attorneys at law. My reflection in the glass looked hard, unyielding, but my stomach was twisting into knots. Inside, The air smelled of leather and old books, the kind of place where secrets were written into contracts and legacies were signed away in ink. A receptionist led me down a narrow hall into a conference room. Vivian was already there, dressed in black silk, though the funeral had been 2 weeks ago. She had that same sharp, triumphant gleam in her eyes, like she'd already won. Ethan lounged beside her, his suit tailored, his tie knotted just so, the perfect image of the heir he thought he was. The moment I walked in, their expressions soured. Well, Vivian drawled, her lips curling. Look who decided to crawl out of whatever hole she's been hiding in. Ethan chuckled, not even bothering to hide his contempt. What are you doing here, Riley? This is family business. I met their eyes, my voice steady. The lawyer asked me to come. Vivian scoffed. That must be a mistake. Charles made it perfectly clear who mattered in this family. And it wasn't you. Before I could reply, the door opened and Mr. Whitman, the lawyer, stepped inside. He was an older man with silver hair and sharp glasses, carrying a thick folder under his arm. His expression was grave, his movements deliberate, as if he knew the weight of the words he carried. "Thank you for coming," he said, settling at the head of the table. His eyes flicked briefly to me, then to Vivian and Ethan. "We're here to execute the last will and testament of Charles Dawson." Vivian straightened in her chair, smoothing her dress like she was preparing for a coronation. Ethan leaned back, smug satisfaction painted across his face. Whitman opened the folder, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. "My name is Charles Dawson. Being of sound mind, I hereby declare this my last will and testament." The formalities rolled on, legal jargon that barely registered. My heart was pounding too loud in my ears. I wanted to get to the part that mattered. I wanted to know why I was there. Then the words came. "To my wife, Vivian Dawson, I leave the sum of $100,000 to be used to her discretion." Vivian's face froze. I saw the flicker of confusion flash in her eyes, quickly masked by composure. $100,000 might sound like a fortune to most people, but to someone used to Charles Dawson's wealth, it was pocket change. Whitman continued. "To my son, Ethan Dawson, I leave the trust fund established for his benefit, as well as certain personal effects." Ethan frowned, sitting up straighter. That didn't sound like the sweeping inheritance he'd been expecting either. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. And then the lawyer's voice shifted, his tone deliberate. "To my daughter, Riley Dawson." The room went silent. Vivian's sharp intake of breath filled the space like a gunshot. Ethan's head snapped toward me, his face a mask of disbelief. My own breath caught in my throat. "I leave the remainder of my estate, including Dawson Industries, the family home, and all associated assets." The words slammed into me like a tidal wave. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My father, who had looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't his daughter, had just named me his heir. Vivian shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is outrageous," she shrieked. "She's not his daughter. He said so himself. Everyone knows it." Whitman didn't flinch. "Mr. Dawson left a statement in his will addressing this matter. If you'll allow me," he flipped to another page, his voice firm as he read. "I have wronged my daughter, Riley. In anger, I denied her, told her lies I regret deeply. The truth is, she is my blood, my only true daughter. I failed her in life, but I will not fail her in death. To her I entrust everything, in the hope that she will build a legacy stronger than my own." The room spun around me. My hands trembled against the table. He had admitted it. After all the years of silence, after the cruelty and rejection, he had finally said the words I had ached to hear. "My daughter." Vivian's face twisted with fury. He was sick. He didn't know what he was saying, but Whitman shook his head. This document was signed and notarized 6 months before his death. His mental faculties were intact. This was his deliberate choice. Ethan's voice rose, sharp with panic. "No. This can't be real. I'm his son. I was supposed to inherit everything." I sat frozen, the storm around me swirling. Vivian's shrill protests, Ethan's angry shouts. Whitman's calm explanations. It all blurred together. All I could hear were my father's words, echoing from the page. I wronged my daughter. She is my blood. Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here.
Not in front of them.
Vivian slammed her fists on the table. We'll contest this. We'll take it to court. You think you've won, Riley, but this isn't over. Her venom rolled off me like water. For the first time in years, I felt something stronger than pain. Vindication. My father had admitted the truth, not to me directly, not while he was alive, but in the only way he could. And he had left me everything. The meeting ended in chaos. Vivian stormed out, her heels clicking like gunshots against the tile. Ethan followed, muttering curses under his breath, his face twisted with rage. Whitman closed the folder and looked at me with something almost like pity. You deserve to hear it, he said quietly. I think he knew that. I nodded, my throat too tight for words. Outside, the sky was heavy with clouds, the air thick with the promise of rain. I stood on the steps of the law office, the weight of the inheritance pressing down on me. It wasn't just money or property. It was years of silence, years of pain, years of being erased. And now, finally, the truth. But the truth came too late. He was gone. I would never hear him say it out loud. Never feel the weight of those words spoken to my face. All I had was ink on paper and the hollow ache of what might have been. Still, a fire lit inside me. If Vivian and Ethan thought I would roll over, they were wrong. If my father had left me his legacy, I would carry it. Not for him, not for them, but for me. That night, I went to the Dawson estate. The gates swung open at my touch, the security guards already informed of the change in ownership. The house loomed in front of me, every brick, every window pane a memory. I walked through the halls, my footsteps echoing. The portraits of my father, of Ethan, of Vivian stared down from the walls. My mother's face was absent, just as it always had been. In the study, I found his desk. The same desk where he'd signed contracts, built his empire, and written the will that changed everything. I sat in his chair, my hands resting on the polished wood, and for the first time, I didn't feel like an intruder. This is mine now, I whispered into the empty room. And I'll make sure you never erase me again. The storm outside broke, rain lashing against the windows, thunder rolling in the distance. It felt fitting, like the world itself was bearing witness to the shift. I wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. I wasn't the outsider. I was Riley Dawson. And the empire my father had built, the empire he had denied me, was finally in my hands. But I also knew this was only the beginning. Vivian and Ethan wouldn't go quietly. They would fight, claw, and scheme to take back what they thought was theirs. And I would be ready, because after years of silence, betrayal, and pain, I had learned how to fight battles no one else could see. And this time, I wasn't just fighting for survival. I was fighting for justice. And I intended to win. The days after the will reading were like walking through a minefield. Everywhere I turned, there was tension, whispers, people who once smiled at me now looking at me with suspicion or outright hostility. The Dawson name had weight in the city, and taking control of my father's estate meant I had inherited not only his assets, but also his enemies. And some of those enemies had my blood. Vivian didn't waste time. 2 days after the lawyers' meeting, I woke to a barrage of headlines on my phone. Estranged daughter claims Dawson fortune. Heir or imposter? Questions surround Riley Dawson. Wife and son vow to contest Dawson will. My picture, taken outside the law office, rain dripping from my hair, was plastered across every article. The narrative was being spun, and it was clear who was pulling the strings. I could practically hear Vivian's voice in the quotes sprinkled through the articles. Charles was manipulated in his final months. Riley is not his daughter. She has no place in this family. Ethan chimed in too. This isn't about money. It's about truth. We won't let lies tarnish my father's legacy. I wanted to laugh at the hypocrisy, but the sting was real. They weren't just challenging me in court. They were trying to erase me in the public eye all over again. At first, I told myself I didn't care. I had survived boot camp, survived combat zones, survived years of being ignored in my own home. But late at night, when the house was quiet and I was left alone with my thoughts, the doubt crept in. What if Vivian and Ethan could twist the truth so tightly that no one believed me? What if the last thing my father had given me was stolen before I could even claim it? That thought alone was enough to harden my resolve. The next morning, I went to Dawson Industries. Walking through those glass doors felt like stepping into a world that had never wanted me. Employees whispered as I passed, their eyes darting to my face, their voices hushed. They had all worked under my father, under Ethan's shadow. Now they were waiting to see if I would crumble. The board of directors met me with cool, professional courtesy. They didn't openly challenge me, but I could feel their skepticism. To them, I was a stranger in their world, a veteran, a daughter who had been cast aside, a name suddenly thrust into power. "I know you have doubts," I told them, meeting each of their gazes. My voice was steady, though inside I was trembling. "But I'm not here to play games or cling to a title. My father left this company to me for a reason. I intend to honor that reason." Some nodded reluctantly. Others frowned, but none openly defied me. Not yet. That night, when I returned to the estate, Vivian was waiting. She didn't bother ringing the bell. She was inside, standing in the foyer like she still owned the place, her face sharp as glass. "You think this will last?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You think you can waltz into our lives and take everything? You're a mistake, Riley. A mistake Charles regretted until his dying breath." I stepped closer, refusing to flinch. Funny, he didn't say that in his will. Her eyes narrowed, fury sparking. "You'll regret this. You don't know the war you've started." I leaned in, my voice cold. "I've been to war, Vivian. And trust me, you don't scare me." She stormed out, her heels striking the marble like gunfire. But her words lingered. The next week was a blur of meetings with lawyers, advisors, and reporters. Every day, another challenge, another attempt by Vivian and Ethan to discredit me. They filed motions in court, demanded DNA tests, paraded witnesses who claimed my father had called me a fraud. But Whitman, my father's lawyer, was relentless. He presented documents, testimonies, medical records proving my father's mental clarity. The DNA test came back undeniable. I was Charles Dawson's daughter, in blood as much as in truth. Ethan's face when the results were read was priceless. Shock, then rage, then panic. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But Vivian was not one to give up easily. If she couldn't win in court, she would try to break me in other ways. One evening, I returned to the estate to find the gates vandalized, spray-painted with words like fraud and thief. My car tires were slashed. Inside the house, picture frames had been knocked over, drawers rifled through. The message was clear. I wasn't welcome. I called the police, but I knew better than to expect justice. Money and influence had ways of making problems disappear. That night, sitting in the wreckage of my father's study, I felt the old wounds reopening. All the years of rejection, the lies, the silence, it was happening again, just dressed in new clothes. They wanted me broken, defeated, erased. But something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let them take this from me. Not again. I started digging. If Vivian and Ethan wanted a war, I would fight on ground they didn't expect. I went through my father's files, his emails, his notes. I talked to employees who had been silenced under Ethan's thumb, to partners who had been pushed out of deals. Slowly, a picture began to form. Dawson Industries wasn't as clean as it looked. Ethan had been covering up mistakes, funneling money into side projects, making deals that bordered on illegal. Vivian had turned a blind eye, content to enjoy the wealth while Ethan ran the show. And my father, maybe he had known. Maybe that was why he had changed his will. The discovery burned in my chest. For years, they had painted me as the black sheep, the outsider. But they were the ones who had rotted the family name from the inside. The first time I confronted Ethan was in the boardroom. He was smooth, arrogant, his confidence unshaken even as I laid the evidence in front of him. "You think this scares me?" he sneered. You think you can ruin me with a few papers? This company needs me, Riley. You're just a soldier playing dress-up in Daddy's chair. I leaned across the table, meeting his eyes.
No, Ethan.
This company doesn't need you. And soon, neither will anyone else. For the first time, I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. But Vivian struck back harder. She launched a media campaign, hiring reporters to smear my name, dragging up every mistake I had ever made. My military service was twisted into something ugly, stories about aggression, PTSD, rumors of misconduct. All lies, but lies can spread faster than truth. There were nights I wanted to give up, when the weight of it all pressed so hard I couldn't breathe. But every time I thought about walking away, I remembered the look on my father's face the last time he told me I wasn't his daughter. I remembered the ache of that betrayal, the years of silence. And I remembered the words in his will. She is my blood, my only true daughter. That was what kept me standing. That was what kept me fighting. The turning point came when I found the letter. It was tucked away in a locked drawer in my father's study, the key hidden in a book he used to read when I was little. The envelope was yellowed, the handwriting unmistakable. It was addressed to me. With shaking hands, I opened it. Riley, if you're reading this, it means I didn't have the courage to tell you in person. I was a coward. I let anger and pride blind me, and I pushed you away when I should have held you closer. You are my daughter. You always were. I see you in every stubborn glance, every fearless choice. I denied you because I was afraid of losing control, afraid of being wrong. I was wrong, Riley. I was so wrong.
Forgive me if you can.
And if not, take what I have left you and build something better than I did. You deserve it.
Dad.
The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. For the first time, I heard his voice in words meant only for me. It wasn't enough to erase the years of pain, but it was enough to remind me that I wasn't fighting for nothing. The next morning, I walked into Dawson Industries with that letter in my pocket. Vivian and Ethan were waiting, smug and defiant. The board was restless, the employees wary. I stood before them all and spoke, my voice strong, my father's words echoing in my chest. You've heard their lies. You've seen their games. But this company is mine, not because a piece of paper says so, but because my father trusted me to lead it. He knew what Ethan had done. He knew the truth about Vivian. And he chose me. I pulled out the letter, holding it high. He chose me not because I was perfect, but because I was strong enough to face the truth. And I intend to do exactly that. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, disbelief. Vivian's face went pale. Ethan's jaw clenched. They knew they were losing. But I wasn't done. This ends now. You tried to erase me once. You tried again after he died. But I'm still here. And I'm not leaving. For the first time, I felt the tide shift. They weren't just fighting me anymore. They were fighting the truth. And the truth was on my side. The weeks after I read my father's letter aloud felt like standing on a battlefield after the smoke cleared, but before the bodies were removed. The war wasn't over. Not by a long shot, but something fundamental had shifted. For the first time, Vivian and Ethan weren't simply on offense. They were on the defensive. And that terrified them. Still, I wasn't naive. The Dawson family didn't retreat. They regrouped. The press attacks slowed but didn't vanish. They simply changed flavor. Instead of calling me a fraud, the headlines asked leading questions. Is Riley Dawson fit to lead? Daughter of Dawson battles PTSD while running Fortune. From battlefield to boardroom, can she handle it? They wanted to paint me as unstable, broken, a soldier unfit to sit in the chair my father had left me. But I wasn't broken. I was angry, and anger had always been fuel for me. One morning, as I walked into the glass tower of Dawson Industries, I found Ethan waiting in the lobby. He was leaning against the marble wall like he owned the place, his suit immaculate, his smile razor sharp. "Morning, sis," he said, his voice dripping with venomous sweetness. Or should I say boss? I walked past him without a word, but he followed, keeping pace with me as the security guards and employees tried not to stare. You think you've won because you waved Daddy's letter around? He sneered. Newsflash, Riley. One sentimental note doesn't erase decades of reality. You're a soldier, not a CEO. You don't belong here. I stopped short, turned, and faced him head-on. Maybe I'm not polished like you. Maybe I don't wear the right suits or smile for the cameras. But I'm not a liar, Ethan. And that's why people are starting to see through you. For the first time, his smile faltered. I didn't wait for a response. I left him standing there, the echo of my boots sharp against the tile. But he wasn't wrong about one thing. I wasn't a CEO. I'd spent my life learning how to survive, how to fight, how to endure. Running a company was a different kind of war, one fought with numbers and negotiations instead of weapons. And I was learning on the fly, every mistake another knife Vivian and Ethan could twist. So I adapted the only way I knew how. I built a team. I called in people I trusted, people who had stood beside me when my life depended on it. Veterans who knew how to strategize, how to execute, how to adapt under pressure. They weren't polished executives, but they were loyal, sharp, and unafraid of a fight. The board hated it. They looked at me like I was replacing their polished empire with a barracks. But I didn't care. I needed people I could trust, not snakes waiting to strike. It wasn't long before we uncovered more of Ethan's dealings. Money funneled into shell companies. Kickbacks hidden in overseas accounts. Contracts signed with names that didn't exist. Every stone we overturned revealed another layer of rot. And I knew then, without a doubt, why my father had chosen me. But Vivian wasn't done. She never would be. One night, I returned to the estate to find her sitting in my father's chair in the study. No guards had stopped her. No locks had kept her out. She was sipping whiskey from his crystal glass, her face lit by the glow of the desk lamp. You look so much like him when you walk in like that, she said, her voice calm, almost wistful. Head high, jaw set, pretending you've already won. I stayed by the door, my fists clenched at my sides. What do you want, Vivian? She swirled the whiskey, the ice clinking against the glass. To remind you that none of this is permanent. Do you really think the board will follow you? Do you think the world will see you as anything but a mistake? Charles gave you everything, but you don't know how to hold it. You'll drop it, Riley. And when you do, I'll be there to pick it up. Her confidence was chilling. Not because I believed her, but because I knew she believed herself. She had spent decades building her life on my father's name. She wasn't going to let me take it without a war. You've already lost, I said, my voice low. The will is final. The DNA test is proof. No matter how much you scream, no matter what stories you plant, I am his daughter. That's the truth. And you can't erase it anymore. Her smile was sharp, cold. Truth doesn't matter, Riley. Power does. And I still have more of it than you could ever imagine. She stood, brushed past me, and left without another word. That night, I barely slept. Her words gnawed at me, twisting in the back of my mind. Maybe she was right. Truth didn't always win. Sometimes lies were louder. Sometimes lies were stronger. But I wasn't going to let hers be the last word. The following week, the boardroom was packed. Vivian and Ethan had called an emergency meeting, claiming serious concerns about my leadership. I walked in to find them seated at the table, side by side, their expressions smug, as if they had already won. Ethan stood. Ladies and gentlemen, we all know why we're here. Riley Dawson may have a piece of paper claiming she owns this company, but ownership doesn't equal leadership. She has no experience, no business acumen, no understanding of what it takes to keep Dawson Industries afloat. She's turning this company into a circus, hiring her war buddies instead of professionals. A murmur rippled through the room. Some of the board members nodded. Others looked uncertain. Vivian's voice followed, smooth and commanding. We cannot allow sentimentality to destroy Charles's legacy. For the good of this company, for the good of its employees, we must act before it's too late. I propose we strip Riley of executive authority and appoint Ethan as acting CEO until the matter is resolved in court. They were trying to gut me in front of everyone. I rose slowly, every eye turning to me. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. You want to talk about legacy? Let's talk about what Ethan has done with it. I dropped a stack of files onto the table. Bank records, contracts, emails. The evidence my team had gathered, laid out in black and white. While you were polishing your speeches, Ethan was draining company funds into shell accounts. While you were worrying about legacies, Vivian was covering his tracks. This isn't about me being unfit to lead. This is about them being unfit to stay free. Gasps filled the room. Vivian's face went pale. Ethan's jaw tightened, his mask slipping for just a second. I didn't stop. My father didn't choose me because I was perfect. He chose me because I wouldn't let this happen. He knew the truth. And now so do all of you. The board erupted into chaos. Shouts, questions, accusations flying. Vivian tried to shout over them, insisting it was all forged, all lies. Ethan tried to regain control, but the damage was done. For the first time, they weren't in control of the narrative. I was. That night, alone in the estate, I stood by the window, staring out at the city lights. I should have felt victorious. I had struck a blow that Vivian and Ethan couldn't easily recover from. But instead, all I felt was exhaustion. This wasn't just about money or power anymore. It was about survival. It was about finally breaking free from the shadow they had kept me in all my life. I thought of my father's letter again. Forgive me if you can. And if not, take what I have left you and build something better than I did. I wasn't sure I could forgive him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I could build something better. And that was exactly what I intended to do. The war wasn't over. Vivian and Ethan still had weapons I hadn't seen. They still had influence, connections, ways of twisting the truth. But so did I. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every moment I had been silenced, every time I had been told I wasn't enough, every time I had been erased. This was my war, and I was going to win it. If you've been with me through this storm, if my fight, my pain, and my fire resonate with you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you won't miss what comes next. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your words mean more than you know.